Gen Z is on track to overtake baby boomers as one of the bigger segments within the active workforce as of 2024. And honestly, I don't think companies are quite ready for it, and I don't know if we as Gen Z are quite ready for what that means for us either. But with this new range of ideas being brought along with us, this new range of experiences and expectations, and a very different relationship with work and our jobs and our careers, it's important that we do talk about what this dynamic will mean and what the changes are going to end up looking like. So, keeping everything simple, let's talk about that. Welcome back to the Keeping Everything Simple podcast. I'm your host and fellow student, Michael Klukas, and on this show, we boil down complicated topics into simple and actionable tips. So, let's set some context here. Gen Z is set to overtake baby boomers in 2024. So this is an article from Axios in 2023, but it shows that by 2024, Gen Z, it's going to be the inflection point in which we are going to overtake baby boomers as the, active members of the workforce by the sheer amount of people who are in full-time roles. Now, the recent article by PBS notes that this is already happening. Gen Z is starting to really kind of get a good foothold in the door. But what's that mean for team dynamics? Ultimately, this is something that has to be reckoned with on a larger scale because some companies just don't understand what this means and don't quite understand how both the team building that they have done so far is going to continue to work, but in a slightly different manner. And when I say slightly different manner, it's understanding that Gen Z likes to collaborate. We very much so enjoy the ability to work together to create something that is by the sum larger than the individual people who put things into it. So you can think of like online communities as a good example of this, where people are freely contributing their time, their experience, their knowledge into some of their passions, and then seeing something else develop out of them instead. But ultimately, this change in team dynamics is going to be largely focused on how are we going to go from, even though we all like to contribute, we also very much like to be individual contributors. So instead of having a hive mind like scenario where everyone's on the same page exactly and working to the same beat of the drum, it's more of a matter of, okay, someone else is working on part A, someone else working on part B, someone's working on part C, and we're all coming together at the end there. And this changes the dynamic from things like the team meeting where everyone's like, I have to be in the same room, we have to sit down and I'll talk about this, to then someone saying, hey, just send me an email of what I need to do. I will get to it, I'll check in, and then we can go from there and just, make sure that we're checking in along the way. For companies and for teams, just team leaders in general, we have to be prepared for what that actually looks like, because if we just get stuck in the old way of doing it, we're going to have a hard time adjusting to when someone feels like they might be, too individualistic about it. But it's just because that's what we've grown comfortable with when so much information and so many resources are just readily available to us that we feel like, hey, we could be able to tackle this on our own. So let me take a crack at it first before I involve the rest of the team. And something important to note is that Gen Z will differ from previous employees because of our relationship not only to, work in general, but to the fact that we are the most diverse generation in history to date, because there's so many of us that come from mixed backgrounds, mixed families, whether that be of cultural background or just actual mixed families in general, from one parent being divorced versus another. What's important to remember about that is, because of this, we are going to differ in how we look at problems and how we also see, best way to put it actually, I think, is what we see as problems. So this book, Gen Z at Work, written by David Stillman and his son Jonah Stillman, is a pretty great resource just to get like a broad overview of how Gen Z does operate at work. And so for Gen Z as employees, one of the big things that they note as being a difference is that they call it phygital. which, yes, I admit it sounds kind of weird, but let me make a point here. And real quick, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you are finding any value on this, if you watch this on YouTube, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you know every time that we upload a new episode. It really does help us out so much, and I greatly appreciate it. If you're listening to us on Spotify or a podcast app, then make sure you leave us a 5-star rating and give us a follow. That way you know, again, every time I upload a new episode. And it just stokes my ego just a little bit more. But with that, let's jump right back into the podcast. When they're talking about phygital, they're referring to the fact that for Gen Z, we are so used to the digital world and the physical world being one and the same for the most part. We have our digital lives, and that impacts our physical lives. And at the same time, our physical lives impact what we do on the internet and online. But that also impacts how we see our work, what we do at work, because when we are trying to make the most of a job, make the most of an opportunity, we're definitely using online resources. We're definitely using online networks, and we're most certainly going to want to avoid team meetings that we feel take away from our ability to actually get some of the work done and are more of just a formality rather than an actual resource for us to draw from. And as they go through and explain what that actively looks like, then we also realize that for Gen Z as employees, we're very realistic and we want to have a mission to follow, because if we're just being sold the same thing as everyone else, the same thing as, say, your customers that you're selling to, then if we're not buying into it, then we're going to have a hard time maintaining motivation to keep pushing through and to keep working on some of the harder projects or some of the more drawn out long-term initiatives. So it's just something to be aware of, especially as we transition away from people who have a much harder time dealing with technology to one being digital natives, but then at the same time having that seamless combination between our physical and our digital lives together. And as I mentioned, Gen Z is going to be the most diverse and well-educated generation in history. And I don't think workplaces are going to quite be ready to handle them. Because for us in Gen Z, coming from so many different backgrounds, so many different competing ideas and values and just lessons that we've learned, that means we're going to come at companies with a different mindset. We're coming at companies out of the pandemic. So the formative years in which we're learning all of the workplace etiquette, we're learning how to best be a part of a team, we're learning how to do XYZ within a company. We didn't get that. We're also coming from different educational backgrounds. So we have a lot of Gen Z now going towards blue collar and trades, but we still have a decent amount of us that are staying within the college career path. But companies have to realize that they can't use the one size fits all approach. And of course, in most circumstances, they shouldn't have done that to begin with, but that's a topic for another day. It still is important to recognize that because they're dealing with so much more diversity within their companies and within their teams, they have to be able to adjust. And they have to be able to recognize where the strengths and weaknesses from each individual come from. And yes, for anyone who's going to be a little warrior in the comments and say, well, hey, you're just talking about like DEI and that's not going to help anyone. Shut up. That's all I got to say to that, because ultimately, when you have a huge, diverse group of people, yes, there are going to be some disenfranchised groups. Yes, there are going to be some minority groups that are not starting from the same point as everyone else, and that has to be recognized. And if we can help draw them up, consider it as a rising tide lifts all ships. I've said this before, and I will say it again. When you help everyone succeed to the best of their abilities, then everyone benefits. And companies have to recognize that, where they can't just kind of be afraid of really bolstering educational opportunities or these initiatives that help people get extra resources to grow in their careers. So companies have to be willing to step up and do that without fearing, flashbacks or backlash. So if companies don't prepare to deal with a more varied and diverse workforce, they're going to have a hard time adjusting to when Gen Z and their employees don't want to stick around when they're just getting lip service rather than seeing actual changes and actually feeling connected to, again, the mission and the values. So what are some simple questions then that companies have to consider with this new transition, with Gen Z, again, overtaking baby boomers within the workforce? Well, the first thing is you have to talk about company culture versus team dynamics. When I mentioned it earlier, companies that only focus on lip service, focus on, hey, we're giving you guys pizza parties and you have free coffee, all you can drink. Does that actually retain good employees? Does that actually make people want to stick around? Of course, it's a perk. Of course, it's something that's a nice to have, but what a need to have becomes is I would like the ability to make sure that my needs are taken care of. I like the ability to make sure that I have a good investment option for my retirement. I want to make sure that I have a good livable wage. I want to make sure that I have good resources to continue my career, continue my education, and actively grow, that there's opportunities to move upwards and not just move sideways. Ultimately, companies have to grapple with, are we just doing the pizza party and using that as a stopgap, or are we actively giving our employees something to look towards, something to move and stake their careers on because they trust us and they want to stick with us? For those that just feel that the pizza party is good enough, then yeah, you're going to have a hard time keeping good employees around because you are doing somewhat the bare minimum, scraping the bottom of the barrel to say, all right, guys, here's free food, have at it, rather than saying, all right, guys, we have these educational courses and these educational resources that you can utilize to advance within your career and then work towards that next level to get a promotion, to get a raise, whatever the situation might be. So pizza parties, good. I'll put them as a thumbs up. However, they are also the lowest solution and the lowest way to build a proper company culture and influence team dynamics. And then in talking about company culture and team dynamics, we also have to grapple with the fact that, using the word phygital again here, Gen Z very much so would benefit and like some hybrid work, but we actually want to be in office. If you don't believe me on this, you can check out this article by Forbes where they talk about the fact that for Gen Z, while it's true that most of Gen Z want the option to work remotely, it's also true we found that most prefer working at the office or on the job, where they have contact with real live human beings rather than just screen-sized images of real live human beings. One of our newest Gen Z hires shared over summer, there's a perception that Gen Z wants to work remotely all the time. And for me, that's definitely not true. I want to meet people, network, and have social connections at work. And yeah, that's important. When you're spending 8 hours a day, so a third of your day at minimum with these people, you want to have good connection with them. You want to have a good, solid network with them. However, the problem also becomes that the assumption is that digital natives only want remote work. But without recognizing the context that we came into the workforce during the pandemic, we came into the workforce when everything was digital, we missed out on key opportunities to connect, grow, and learn that we're looking for them now. And so we have to then think, and companies have to grapple with, are we going to offer only in person? Are we going to do like Amazon and force people back to work because we just think, oh, hey, this is going to keep us competitive? Or are they going to embrace hybrid and remote work that gives people these options and opens up their talent pool to retain good top talent? And of course, it sounds like hybrid is going to be the easiest way to go because it's a smooth transition. Because for those of us who want to be in office and actively connect with our coworkers, actively learn the team dynamics, and actively dive into the company culture, then we can do that. But also, we don't probably need to be in the office 5 days out of the week. If you're looking for an entry into journaling or just want to get more mindful about your own productivity, then go ahead and check out our daily review journal. This is the first edition of that journal. Available now on Amazon. Combining my own kind of journaling prompts throughout the day, it is an easy way to get you into journaling along with easy formatting to follow. So from daily gratitude to a daily review, along with goal setting using tomorrow's daily highlight, and ending with any notes and miscellaneous reminders that you might have for yourself. It is a fantastic way to, again, start the habit of journaling, as well as get more intentional about how you control your own view of life and your day to day. So this is just one step in that direction on how I can help you guys do that. But follow the link in the description down below to pick one up today. And with that, let's jump right back into the podcast. When we're able to do remote work, say like 2 to 3 days out of the week or something along those lines, then that gives flexibility. That gives the benefit in of itself of allowing the company to say, hey, we value what you guys want to do. We value the time that you are giving us. So here is here's our compromise. Hybrid work. You can take these 2 days out of the week to work from home, come into the office the other 2 days, work with the team. But then that flexibility in of itself just breeds so much more satisfaction because we are getting the exposure that we didn't get in the beginning while still having the ability to live our lives outside of work and still be productive. Because yes, in America, it's all about productivity. And we have to then also grapple with which companies retain the best talent. Those are the ones that are putting people over profit in some capacity, and they're actively taking care of their employees. Now, when I say it like that, it's because so much of the conversation revolves around how is the bottom line? How are we increasing value for our shareholders? How are we making sure that we're paying our workers as little as possible while keeping as much as possible in the profit margin? And of course, I recognize that it's a system of capitalism that operates within America, and that is what we're kind of built on. But if you want to talk about company culture, then you have to recognize that the companies that retain the best talent are those that invest in them. Now, this is another article, and this one is by Newsweek, where it notes that companies are quickly firing Gen Z employees, which, hey, that sounds like a bit of an issue. Because the survey revealed, and this is a survey from intelligent.com, that 1 in 6 businesses said they were hesitant to hire college graduates over concerns about how prepared they are for work, as well as their communication skills and professionalism. And a whopping 6 in 10 employers had already fired college graduates who were hired in 2024. 1 in 7 say they might refrain from hiring new college grads next year as well. Need I remind you how stupid that is when, again, Gen Z is going to overtake baby boomers as the active members within the workforce, and they are saying, hey, you know what, we can't handle them, their communication skill isn't there, the professionalism isn't there. Are we just going to ignore the pandemic consistently? Are companies just going to say, oh, well, they just aren't ready, we can't do anything about it, what are we going to do? Rather than recognizing, hey, that kind of falls on the education system and on the companies to do better on that front, and for Gen Z to take those opportunities actively and pursue them. It's kind of a two-way street. But back to the question at hand, which companies retain the best talent? The people that recognize that, the companies that recognize, hey, we have to make sure everyone's on the same page. As we continue on through like this Newsweek article, and all the articles I'm mentioning are going to be linked in the description down below, is that there's the stereotype that Gen Z is lazy and uncooperative, and employers are primed to have that be at the first sign of a problem, be like, all right, not worth it. Let's just get rid of them, get them out of here. We'll get someone more experienced in the door. But as we grow as a worker segment, you're going to have a harder time finding people who are experienced and ready to go out the gate. Like, yeah, the oldest of Gen Z is like 28 now or 29, something along those lines. But that still doesn't change the problem that the bulk of us are going to be still within the start of our careers. And so we can't have companies just saying, all right, we can't deal with these people because they lack experience, because they're not ready. Because at that point, it's just people hanging on to the status quo rather than being willing and enabling their employees to do better and wanting them to do better and be better. So with that, though, what are some simplified actions? So simple tips that you can take away and that companies, please listen to this, that you can actively implement. First and foremost, yes, Gen Z needs to level up our office skills and be ready for opportunities to level them up. But that means companies have to actively be okay communicating that, hey, we are going to give you chances to learn these skills and we're going to help you grow them so that way you can succeed not only in this role, but further on down the line, because we want you to do your best and be your best, even if you end up leaving in the future. And that level of understanding and selflessness, and I'm going to frame it as selflessness, helps retain top talent because they recognize, hey, even if I end up going somewhere else, this company wants me to succeed. They want me to come away from this with a positive experience and with new skills that are going to help me and benefit me. And that is amazing. But in the same vein, Gen Z, we have to be ready to take on those opportunities, and we have to be willing to seek out those chances to understand office professionalism, to understand how to, dress business casual, to understand what proper office communication looks like, and all the works along those lines. So we have to be willing to adjust to those ourselves, and companies have to be willing to provide them. So that way, again, a give and take relationship can form, and everyone benefits as a result. Real quick, if you are enjoying this episode, then you might also enjoy our weekly newsletter, the Keeping Everything Simple newsletter. Yes, there is a very obvious naming scheme going on here, but that's besides the point. If you want to get an inside look into how some of the lessons and stories I talk about play out in my life, then the weekly newsletter would be a great way to dive deeper into that, as well as getting resources and recommendations for books, articles, other YouTube videos that will give you greater insight into some of these complicated topics and how we're going to be able to boil them down more and more together. Subscribe down below in the link in description to the Keeping Everything Simple newsletter, and I will see you in your inbox. All right, let's get back to the podcast. And along that same note, companies need to offer up more training and learning opportunities because, as I mentioned, the pandemic, of course, we're not going to ignore that. It was a big shift in how companies and how employees operated, because for Gen Z, we're coming into a fractured workplace. We're coming into a digital-only work environment, and we lost so many opportunities to get internships or mentorship programs, and now we are trying to play catch up instead. And so companies that can offer a wide variety of these opportunities and these learning experiences will have a much better go of it as they're trying to work with this new crop of employees. And this can be a huge variety of things. It can be either, hey, here's actual professional classes, or here are professional resources that you can use or draw from, or it's hey, let's get a subscription to LinkedIn Learning as a basis, or here are resources that we recommend that you check out that are important to this field, important to this company, and also here's some ones that can be just used in general. But ultimately it comes down to providing them to the employees, so that way the quality of life at the company improves, the company culture as a whole is informed by that decision, and employees feel like they have an actual, need and desire to invest in that company because that company is choosing to invest in them. And one of the more important conversations here is companies have to grapple with how are they balancing out the need for shareholder profit and the needs of their employees. Yes, this is a conversation and a question that is far too deep to get into within this video right now, but this is the simplified action that needs to be taken by both the companies and both the employees, deciding what's your priority. How are you going to prioritize it? So for employees, it's prioritizing, hey, your career prospects, and your ability to play catch up and get ahead of those who came before you and get ahead of yourself in your career. Because ultimately that's what comes down to, is you are not facing off against everyone else around you. You are facing off against the you from last year, the you from 2 years ago, the you from 3 years ago. You are trying to get ahead of where you used to be and improve your quality of life, because that's why you are working. You don't live to work, you work to live. And for companies, of course, more often than not, the priority is going to be shareholder profit. As I mentioned previously, you are beholden to the corporate benefactors of, hey, here is the amount of money that we're trying to return to our investors. Here's the profit we're trying to give them. And that is fine. It's the system we operate under. But some companies that are finding a good balance between the two of them, they are able to give back to their teams more. They're able to invest in their company more and not just pay money out to shareholders. They can also experience phenomenal retention. They can experience a phenomenal company culture that influences their decisions further on down the line. So decide what your priority is and decide how you're going to go about working within that understanding, because that will help you make correct decisions. It will help you make correct decisions for yourself, for your team, and for the future of your career. In the end, Gen Z is overtaking baby boomers this year. By the end of this year, most likely, we're going to have more Gen Z actively in the workforce than there are baby boomers, and companies need to actually come to terms with this. And for those of us in Gen Z, we have to be ready to step up to the plate. We have to be taking initiative to find those opportunities to learn, find those opportunities to grow, and align ourselves with companies that actively match our values. Because, yeah, a lot of us like finding companies that match our values, but also understand that sometimes we're just going to end up in a job. And so it's best to find one that we can work well with, even if we know it's not going to be something we're going to dedicate the rest of our lives to. And for companies, they have to understand that Gen Z is still within the start of their careers. If you want people to stick around, if you want people to really invest in your company and invest time with you, you have to invest in them. But with that, have an amazing day, you amazing people. I will see you all in the next episode. Keeping everything simple. Go out there and do great things. I'll see y'all next time.